Warframe is a game with more than 1,000 mods, and thereby millions of options to make all of your gear stronger, but you'll notice if you watch a lot of Warframe content, especially builds and guides, most content creators kind of use similar sets of mods in the majority of their builds, whether that's a Warframe, companion, weapon, whatever. These are the core / meta options that you have, and while they're not going to populate the entire build usually, they'll take up more than half the slots generally. I would say Warframe's mods can be categorized into 4 tiers. Tier 1 is the one I just mentioned, the blind rages, the overextended, the transient fortitudes, intensifies, stuff like that. Things that are generally good. If your Warframe or weapon wants a stat, this is how you get it. Vital Sense is another good example. Tier 2 are the slightly more niche mods that usually have one key downside, whether that is an objective downside or a playstyle downside, is the reason that they belong in tier 2. This is something like a Bane mod. Bane mods provide a ton of damage with statuses, and they're really strong, but their main downside is nobody wants to switch those boys around. I hate Bane mods personally. Something like Acuity, someone who, Acuity's, it's a great mod, but if you're against Infested, which can be sometimes hard to headshot, or as a player your aim just sucks, then you're not going to want to use the Acuity mods. That's just how that goes. And then if it's the case of like a Warframe's kit, Precision Intensify is a really great option, but it's not good on every single Warframe that wants the strength stat in the same way that Intensify or Blind Rage is. Tier 3 is the more niche interactions, things like status duration with Harmony, depleted reload with Evectus Prime, and the Boreal set for, characters like Jade or Titania. These are really strong interactions, but these mods belong on like 1 to 3 Warframes or weapons max. They're strong, but just niche. Tier 4 is the total garbage, and I want to look at some of the total garbages today, specifically the mods that you kind of first get when you first start the game. These mods are like Warm Coat, Heat Repellent, Lightning Rod, stuff like that, Diamond Skin. These mods are completely useless garbage, and there's a lot of completely useless garbage mods, but I want to take a look specifically at these, and I want to rework them. I've got 2 ideas for you today, 2 versions, one that focuses on their kind of initial defensive properties, but making that stronger, because you get these early on, so that's kind of a goal of my rework, or one that focuses more towards damage, which could make this a more of a viable option for later game players as well. I know we don't really need more damage, but I want to show you guys both versions today. This is a bit of a community project. I encourage you strongly to head to the comments, see what version you like the most. Maybe you like a little bit of both. Both of these mods can also exist at the same time. That's the way I've reworked them. So if you like both, you can have both. If you want both put into one, let me know. I really want to hear you guys' ideas on this, because I think some of these Warframe players are incredibly smart and have way better ideas than I do. And I think that bringing some of these mods up really aligns with DE's balance approach and all that. So let's take a look at Lightning Rod, Warm Coat, Insulation, Diamond Skin, Flame Repellant, and Antitoxin. These absolutely piss useless mods, and don't forget to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thank you so much for tuning in. So much love. I'll see you in a little bit. So for those who are tuning in without real knowledge of what these mods do, and I really don't blame you if you don't, we haven't seen these mods in quite some time. Here they are. So these are the mods that provide a certain type of elemental resistance overall, and they also only tick up to 60% total for the most part. I believe Diamond Skin goes lower for some reason, I believe. These mods are weird and have basically no use, especially Warm Coat. Oh my god, plus 3% shield resistance to environmental ice hazards. So these provide a resistance to a certain status type, which can be quite useful. The problem is Adaptation exists now. So Adaptation, if you guys don't know, is a really good mod. It's one of the only sources of shield DR that is not tied to like flat DR that like Mace's Shatter Shield or Mirage's Eclipse or whatever provides. It's something you can equip on any Warframe, which means someone like Caliban, who gets a ton of shields but no DR, you can kind of put all of the pieces where they belong, get a bunch of shields, get a bunch of DR, everything works together. So Adaptation is this done right. But now these mods were always kind of irrelevant, so I want to rework them into 2 different versions. The first version I call the Bolstering Defense set. So these would be exclusive, you would not be able to equip both, 2 at the same time. And the other one is the Elementalist set. And these are both going to be specifically tied to the elements they represent. So let's take a look and see kind of what that looks like. So quick little note from the editor's room here. Notice in my background footage, I'm getting spit roasted and Eiffel Towered by these Revenant players here with Mesmer Shield, so I will be invulnerable for this entire run. I've got a cool little Harrow Sporothrix setup I like a lot, so if you guys have any comments on that, you can go ahead and leave in the comments any questions. Let's get back to the video anyway. Please check out my Revenant rework if you've been hate crimed like this before too. You matter. Bye-bye. So taking a look at the defensive approach, this kind of keeps in theme with the original intent of these mods. So I'll show you some of the defensive options I've made, looking at the ability to kind of tank more effectively, as opposed to like a shield gating approach. This is a real, like, you're basically getting DR, some status immunity, and it kind of applies to the Warframe you're playing and it teaches you to play with synergies. So for heat, this is now called Blazing Defense. For cold, it's called Frozen Defense. Electricity is called Static Defense. Toxin is called Venomous Defense. Radiation is Irradiated Defense. And I've added a new one that I don't think initially existed called Magnetic Defense. I don't think there was a magnetic resistance. The way these work is they give 15% damage reduction right off rip. That's real simple. It's a way to give damage reduction to shields, which you traditionally do not have. Helps a lot of shield dominant frames out, and Volt and Mag, the two starter frames, are quite reliant on their shields to keep themselves alive, so that could be really nice. And then I couldn't figure out how to get this into like perfect modding wording because you only get so much room in those mod rectangles. But basically, when radiation is applied to you or an enemy with an ability, if it's to you, you negate that status effect, so you become status immune to the given status effect. So in this case, Diamond Skin is now Irradiated Defense. So if you get radiation procced on you, it goes away. And then when you apply the status, or you endure the status, you gain 5% DR, and this can stack up to 3 times. Meaning, if you are Oberon and you place down Hollowed Ground, you basically get all 3 stacks right away. You now have 30% damage resistance, along with straight up immunity to radiation. With Venomous Defense, if you're playing Saren and you Toxin Lash and hit some enemies, you now have 30% DR and immunity to Toxin. I don't think this would be that broken. I've really thought deeply about it. My only concern would be, like, it's kind of hard to deal. Like, I would probably adjust Mag to actually deal magnetic damage because I don't think she does right now. I could be wrong, actually. Maybe it's just magnetized that doesn't deal magnetic damage despite the name, but I would rework the way some frames deal their damage with this change. But I think that overall getting this early on can make your shields a lot tankier, can encourage you to kind of use your kit in a certain way. Like Volt with static defense would be really great because you could constantly give yourself, you have replenishing shields. Every time you shock someone, you're getting DR. Like, to me, this is a very easy way to teach players how to synergize well with their own kits. So again, all this is 15% damage reduction up front, and then when you endure X, whatever status effect it is, or you deal X status effect with an ability, you become status immune to the status effect, and you gain 5% additional DR stacked up to 3 times. This leads to a total of 30% damage reduction. Again, I think this is a super simple rework to already completely useless mods, and it would be good. It would be decent for late game, but really strong for an early game build. And it also teaches you to build for certain, when you have a certain frame, it teaches you how to build for the certain element that your frame deals with. Oh, and if you guys have any ideas for the names, please leave that in the comments as well. I didn't want to include anything that said shield or armor because that's not what the mods do, and I feel like if you're getting these early game, it can be kind of confusing to new players. Also, the numbers are very arbitrary, so if you have anything to say with the numbers, please leave those in the comments as well. This is kind of the defensive setup. I think that would work really well and teach players the mod and kind of unique. And these mods would obviously be mostly early game, but I think a lot of these could translate really well into late game, especially if you've got like a flex slot. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We're gonna move on to my damage approach, which I know many people would agree we don't need more damage, but I thought it was a cool approach that can make these more incentivizing to later game players and also be quite interesting. So let's take a look. Looking at the offensive approach, these are the Elementalist mods, I'm going to be calling them, and those already exist. I don't think it'd be that confusing since you run into the Weapon Elementalist mods later on. This would be a good introduction to them. In this case, there would be 5. There would be no magnetic one. It would be Blazing Elementalist, Frozen Elementalist, Static Elementalist, Irradiated Elementalist, and Venomous Elementalist. These work very similar, so that's what I'm saying. They could technically coexist really easily. So first you get your flat stat, and that's going to be plus 25%, again arbitrary numbers. In this case with Irradiated Elementalist, it would be plus 25% radiation damage with abilities. I'll use the heat one as an example. So plus 25% heat damage with abilities. when you affect an enemy with a heat proc, you gain an additional 5% heat damage, and then that stacks up to another 25%, so it stacks 5 times. So total, you'll be getting plus 50% heat damage. Pretty good, right? Like, that's solid, and that's niche enough. And I was debating whether I wanted to make you immune to the proc that you're going for. I don't know how broken that would be. Like, if Blazing Elementalist gave you immunity to heat procs, you guys can decide that one in the comments if that makes it too strong. DE is very in favor of stronger stuff, so if you think that's a good idea and would make this mod something you'd actually equip, you should go for it. One thing you'll notice here is that radiation and cold don't work here. Now granted, the plus 25% radiation damage with abilities or plus 25% cold damage with abilities would work, but like, you don't really deal status damage with these. They're not DOTs in the same way that heat, toxin, and electricity are. So how do we rework them? Well, cold is actually a lot easier because I like what cold does as a support element. It freezes enemies, CC is good, and increases the crit damage they take. I would simply have the text read like additional crit damage or an additional freeze duration. That would be it. It would be that simple for Frozen Elementalist. But Irradiated Elementalist, I actually kind of hate what radiation does right now. First of all, it messes some builds up, and most builds that even want to try to use it like are better off working with stuff like Nexus Mind Control, Damage Decoy, stuff like that, Mark for Death, so on and so forth. Radiation currently just makes enemies attack each other, and the more radiation stacks you get, they deal more damage to each other. This is very inconsistent, and I wouldn't want Irradiated Elementalist to buff that part of the radiation. I just think it's kind of ass. So I've had a few ideas. I had an idea that was like a % health true damage bleed, but that's kind of similar to Slash. Like, while writing this script for this rework, I noticed that Warframe really has a good blanket over like what most status effects do. Like, there aren't many like obvious gaps in design. I tried like explosions on death with radiation, but that's kind of close to blast and can be kind of hard to balance, like Sobek acid shells if it were to do like a percentage of their health. Then I decided to opt for something that sounds really lame initially, but I think it actually works really well. So, okay, how is radiation generally used? It goes on radiation-centric frames. So like Oberon, Corvex, Nyx, like Lavos can use it technically, and usually ends up being used for like utility. So like CC, keeping enemies off you, Arcane Universal Fallout, or it sets you up for more damage. Like in the case of the, her bolts, Psychic Bolts. Pacifying Bolts is what it's called that Nyx uses. Pretty good. Or the second case for radiation is on frames like Kome or Varuna, who just give enemies like 10 zillion STDs statuses, and you know, they get debuffed or spread, or they nuke with that way. So to me, like, radiation always basically ends up as like a support status, which is good and fine. I like that, and that's why it's kind of the weakest, because the competition it's dealing with is insane, but it's also not meant to be the main star of the show, kind of similar to Magnetic. So what I've concluded is that it's going to be universal status damage vulnerability. Enemies that are hit by your radiation abilities will take 5% more status damage from all sources, and this will stack with the amount of radiation stacks you have. So I was thinking, like, I don't know, maybe 2% per radiation stack would be pretty good, therefore up to 20% more status damage from all sources. That sounds really good, but I also think that's what radiation should do, and like, radiation-centric frames would be getting an insane buff that I think they need, and if not need, just want. And yeah, that was the hardest one I could come to, and unfortunately I do have to dedicate a little bit more extra time to it, because it's not as simple as shock damage or heat damage or toxin damage. Like, radiation is a weak element, and this is my way of giving it something to do within the context of Warframe. So we're going to do a little conclusion bit, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this kind of rework idea. I know it's really hard to explain, that's why I'm going to try to use graphics and stuff to help you out. But yeah, for the Elementalist set would basically just be for those DOT elements. It would just be bonus heat damage, and then more heat damage when you deal heat damage or take heat damage. Likewise, with cold, it would increase their freeze duration and increase the crit damage they take from when frozen. And then with Irradiated Elementalist, it would be they just take more status damage that correlates with how many radiation stacks they have on them. So hopefully, I know I'm yapping my ass off, and we're just gonna get to the last bit where I'll really conclude, and hopefully you guys have been enjoying this. I appreciate your time. Much love. See you in a second. So how do we conclude this rework? Well, we have these mods here that are incredibly useless, but actually serve a pretty unique niche purpose. One that got completely, obliterated by the adaptation mod. But I think that their theming is quite good. They kind of sacrifice the same situation with a Bane mod, where you have to equip them based on what situation you're in, and I've noticed that there's almost nothing Warframe players hate more than that. So I've decided to take an approach that basically makes it so, as opposed to switching your resistance mod based on what content you're headed into, switching that mod based on what Warframe you're playing. That way you never have to swap it out on a whim, because that can be really inconvenient. I've also tried to make these moderate in strength in a way that new players would really want it, and late game players might have to make a decision around them. I think both are actually pretty solid. So as a TLDR, as a summary, we have version 1, which is the defense set. These basically give you flat damage reduction, and then status immunity to the status that they are aligned with, along with bonus DR when you deal or take damage of that status variety. Route 2, or version 2, is the elemental offensive approach, which is like elementalist mods basically. That gives you flat damage of your respective type. So again, Blazon would give you heat, static would give you electricity, and then when you deal damage of that type with your abilities or take it, you get additional status damage based on the status that you are equipping using there. With cold, because it is not a status damage ability or status damage status, it is different. It'll give you more crit damage on frozen enemies and a longer freeze duration. And then with irradiated, with radiation, because that is also a supportive element, this gives enemies status damage vulnerability, scaling with how many radiation stacks they have on them, up to 20%. So yeah, that's the TLDR. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this rework. I have a whole script, like a whole book full of things I want to rework about this game. So if this is something that you guys enjoy, I try to be a little bit more unique. Please leave a comment. So much love for you guys. Like, subscribe, all that BS, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.